Gigantic brass engines powered by hissing steam filled entire halls in London, their thousands of clicking gears calculating the empire's finances. Young women in starched collars and men with mutton chop whiskers became the first analytical programmers, meticulously feeding coded instructions on stiff cards into these metallic behemoths. Elsewhere, the rhythmic clatter of automated looms wove not just intricate tapestries, but also the first lines of machine-generated poetry, read aloud in gas-lit salons to bewildered audiences. Number 8. The world was run by colossal clockwork brains. Imagine walking into a grand government building in the 1880s. Instead of quiet offices, you'd be met with a deafening symphony of noise. The air would be thick with the smell of hot oil, coal smoke, and the distinct metallic tang of overworked machinery. This was the era of the great calculating engines, magnificent and terrifying contraptions that were the beating heart of Victorian innovation. These were not sleek, silent devices. They were monsters of brass, iron, and polished wood, often taking up entire rooms, sometimes multiple floors. Their power source was the very essence of the age: steam. Roaring furnaces, tended by soot-covered stokers, boiled water to drive pistons and turn belts, which in turn animated thousands upon thousands of precisely machined gears, levers, and clicking actuators. These analytical engines, as their inventors proudly called them, were the descendants of Charles Babbage's theoretical designs, brought to life with the full might of Victorian engineering. Smaller versions, driven by intricate clockwork, springs, or even the new somewhat unreliable electric batteries, found their places in universities and the laboratories of wealthy industrialists. But the true titans were steam-powered. Their operation was a constant battle against heat and friction. Teams of mechanics, their faces streaked with grease, moved through the labyrinthine structures, oil cans in hand, listening for the telltale shriek of a dry bearing or the ominous grind of a misaligned cog. Breakdowns were frequent, and repairs were complex, often involving the custom remilling of a damaged part in an adjacent workshop. The input for these machines was not a keyboard, but stacks upon stacks of stiff pasteboard cards, perforated with holes in complex patterns. These cards, an evolution of the Jacquard loom system, held the instructions and the data. Armies of clerks, known as card scribbers, meticulously punched these holes, translating human queries into a language the engines could understand. The output was equally mechanical. Clattering printers hammered out results onto vast sheets of paper, or in some advanced models, directly embossed figures onto metal plates for printing ledgers and tables. The sheer physicality of information processing was astounding. People marveled at these engines, watching their intricate dance of components with a mixture of awe and a quiet, unsettling fear. They were symbols of progress, of Britain's industrial genius, yet their relentless, inhuman calculation also sparked a new kind of anxiety about the future of man in a world increasingly dominated by intelligent machinery. Public viewings were common, with crowds gathering behind velvet ropes to witness the iron brain at work, its rhythmic chugging a soundtrack to a rapidly changing world. Number 7. The peculiar rise of the analytical program. With the advent of the great calculating engines, a new profession was born, one that bewildered many and fascinated others: the analytical programmer. These were the individuals who could speak to the machines, who understood the intricate logic required to coax useful work from the spinning gears and clattering levers. At the forefront, in spirit, if not always in direct influence due to the era's social constraints, was the legacy of Ada Lovelace, whose notes on Babbage's theoretical engine became the foundational texts for this new discipline. Many of the first programmers were, surprisingly to some women, their perceived aptitude for detailed, meticulous work, similar to needlepoint or musical notation, made them naturals for the painstaking task of translating complex mathematical problems into sequences. These programmers did not sit before glowing screens. Their tools were heavy manuals filled with operational codes, drafting tables where they mapped out logical sequences, and specialized clanking machines for punching the instruction cards. Their work environment was often adjacent to the noisy, hot engine rooms, requiring them to develop a tolerance for the constant din. Programmers' day involved hours of intense concentration, checking and rechecking long chains of symbolic logic, as a single misplaced hole on a card could lead to wildly inaccurate results or, worse, a catastrophic jam in the expensive machinery. They developed their own jargon, a strange mix of mathematical terms and mechanical metaphors. Beditching was a physical act, often involving tracing the path of calculations through the engine's visible workings or examining piles of misprinted output for clues. Socially, analytical programmers occupied a curious niche. They were highly skilled, possessing a rare combination of mathematical insight and mechanical sympathy. Yet, their work was often seen as arcane, almost occult, by the general public. Some viewed them as intellectual heroes, taming the iron giants for the good of society. Others whispered that they were engaged in something unnatural, teaching machines to think in ways best left to humans. Universities began to offer specialized courses in analytical logic and mechanical computation, drawing in bright young minds intrigued by this fusion of mathematics and engineering. The demand for skilled programmers grew rapidly as more engines were built for government, industry, and science. They formed their own societies, published journals filled with new algorithm and programming techniques, and slowly, painstakingly, began to lay the groundwork for a world where machines could not just calculate, but also follow complex human-devised instructions to perform a dazzling array of tasks. The sight of a programmer, male or female, emerging from an engine room, smudged with graphite from the punch cards and with a look of intense concentration, became a new icon of the Victorian age of steam and steel. Number 6. The Empire's all-seeing eye and the dawn of data. The arrival of powerful calculating engines provided Victorian governments, particularly that of the sprawling British Empire, with an unprecedented tool for administration and control. Suddenly, the immense task of managing vast populations, complex economies, and distant colonies became, in theory, quantifiable and optimizable. The first major application was the national census. Instead of armies of clerks spending years manually tabulating handwritten forms, data was transcribed onto punched cards and fed into the engines. Results that once took a decade to compile now appeared in a matter of months, providing a far more current snapshot of the nation's demographics, health, and wealth. This efficiency was quickly extended to tax collection, with engines cross-referencing property records, income declarations for the few who paid it, and trade tariffs, identifying discrepancies and potential fraud with cold, mechanical impartiality. Across the empire, from India to Canada, colonial administrators began to rely on data processed by engines either locally, if smaller, dedicated machines were shipped out, or centrally in London. Information on crop, yields, resource, extraction, troop movements, and even patterns of local unrest could be gathered, transmitted via telegraph in coded form, and then analyzed. This created a new kind of power imbalance where the imperial center possessed a far more comprehensive and timely understanding of its domains than ever before. The engines became tools for maintaining order, for strategic resource allocation, and for projecting an image of omniscient governance. The sheer volume of data being collected was staggering. New government departments, like the Imperial Office of Computation and Statistics, sprang into existence, employing hundreds of clerks for data entry and programmers to design the analytical processes. This new capability for mass data collection and analysis was not without its critics, though their voices were often drowned out by the chorus of progress. Concerns about privacy, though not framed in modern terms, began to surface. The idea that the state could know so much about individuals, their births, deaths, marriages, occupations, and even through emerging police applications their suspected associations, was unsettling to some. Philosophical debates arose in hushed tones, in parlors, and more loudly in radical pamphlets. How much should the government know? And what would it do with this knowledge? There were no easy answers. And the engines, indifferent to such human concerns, continued their relentless work of sifting, sorting, and summarizing the human condition into columns of figures and neatly printed reports. The age of big data had dawned, not with silicon chips, but with steam brass, and the tireless efforts of a new class of information workers, serving the ever-watchful eye of the Victorian state. Number 5. Steam-podded strategy and analytical warfare. The military establishments of the Victorian era, already fascinated by scientific and industrial advancements, were quick to grasp the potential of the new calculating engines for warfare. Generals and admirals, long reliant on experience, intuition, and painstakingly hand-calculated tables, saw in these machines a path to greater precision and efficiency in the deadly art of conflict. One of the earliest and most aptly applications was in ballistics. Trajectory of an artillery shell is a complex mathematical problem, affected by factors like muzzle velocity, shell weight, air resistance, and even the rotation of the Earth for very long-range guns. Human computers, the term then referred to people who performed calculations, could spend days on the calculations for a new type of gun or shell. Analytical engines could do it in hours, or even minutes, producing firing tables of unprecedented accuracy and scope. This led to artillery that was more accurate, with a greater effective range, changing battlefield dynamics. Logistics, the often unseen backbone of any military campaign, was another area ripe for computational improvement. Feeding, arming, and transporting vast armies was a monumental organizational challenge. Engines were programmed to optimize railway schedules for troop deployments, calculate the required tonnage of supplies for campaigns of varying lengths and distances, and even manage the inventories of sprawling arsenals. Quartermaster's department, once a realm of ledgers and guesswork, began to transform into a data-driven operation. Naval warfare also benefited. Engines aided in ship design, calculating hull stresses and stability. Complex navigational calculations, especially for long voyages or for coordinating fleet movements across vast oceans, could be performed more rapidly. The integration of computational power with the rapidly developing telegraph systems allowed for a new level of command and control, with admirals potentially directing fleets with more up-to-date information than ever before. The most secretive application, however, was in cryptography. As nations developed more complex cipher systems to protect their diplomatic and military communications, the engines offered a powerful means of both encrypting and, more critically, decoding enemy messages. A computational arms race began, not with missiles, but with algorithm. Code breakers, already a shadowy but vital part of intelligence services, now had mechanical assistants capable of testing thousands of possible data toppling keys, far faster than any human team. This new capability introduced a chilling efficiency to espionage and counter-espionage. The engines themselves, being large, expensive, and strategically vital, became high-value targets, housed in secure facilities and guarded closely. The dream of a scientific war, where battles were won as much by superior calculation as by bravery, began to take shape, promising a future where conflict might be more predictable and perhaps more terrifyingly efficient. The human element of courage and sacrifice remained, but it was now augmented and in some ways overshadowed by the relentless logic of the analytical war machines. Number 4. the mechanical muses, and the curious case of Alemannic art. Beyond the realms of governance, industry, and warfare, the influence of the Victorian calculating engine seeped into an arena many considered uniquely human: the arts. It began subtly with the machine's ability to generate complex patterns. Designers of textiles, wallpapers, and intricate ironwork found that engines fed with certain mathematical rules could produce novel and aesthetically pleasing geometric designs, far more complex than those easily drafted by hand. Automated looms, already transforming fabric production, were now sometimes guided by punch cards that dictated not just weaving techniques, but also elaborate, algorithmically generated patterns, leading to new styles in fashion and interior decoration. Architects experimented with using engines to calculate optimal structural forms or to generate variations on ornamental motifs for building facades. More controversially, experiments began in what was termed automated composition. Programmers, often those with a musical or literary inclination, attempted to teach the engines the rules of harmony and melody, or the structure of poetic forms. Early results were often crude and repetitive. An engine might produce a simple, mathematically correct but emotionally sterile piece of music, perhaps a waltz with predictable phrasing, or a hymn with rigid harmonies. In literature, machines could be programmed with lists of words and grammatical rules to generate short verses or prose passages. These engine poems might adhere to rhyme schemes and metrical patterns, but they typically lacked the depth, nuance, and emotional resonance of human creativity. Samples were read in salons and intellectual circles, often met with a mixture of amusement, curiosity, and a distinct sense of unease. The reaction from the established artistic community was deeply divided. Some avant-garde figures were intrigued, seeing the engines as a new tool, a way to explore novel forms of expression or to challenge conventional notions of creativity. They saw potential in the aleatoric or chance-based elements that could emerge from complex algorithm. Others, however, were horrified. The idea that a machine, a soulless assembly of gears and levers, could participate in the sacred act of artistic creation was anathema to many romantic and traditionalist sensibilities. Fierce debates raged in art journals and public lectures. Can a machine truly create art? Does an algorithm possess an aesthetic sensibility? If beauty can be calculated, what then is the role of human genius and inspiration? The very definition of art was called into question. While no engine-composed symphony rivaled Beethoven, and no algorithmic sonnet eclipsed Shakespeare, the mechanical muses had undeniably arrived, clanking and whirring their way into the cultural landscape, forcing Victorians to confront profound questions about the nature of creativity itself in an increasingly mechanized world. This early agronismic art might have been rudimentary, but it planted the seeds for a future where the boundary between human and machine creativity would become increasingly blurred. Number 3. The great cloud-driven economic shift and its anxious public. The introduction of calculating engines into the Victorian economy acted like a powerful new gear, grinding existing structures and creating entirely new ones, often with jarring and unsettling speed. The most immediate impact was felt in industries that relied heavily on manual calculation and record-keeping. Banking, insurance, shipping, and large mercantile houses had traditionally employed armies of clerks, predominantly men, who spent their days hunched over ledgers, performing endless additions, subtractions, and interest calculations. These human computers were suddenly faced with a formidable, non-human competitor. An engine could perform in hours what a roomful of clerks might take weeks to accomplish, and with fewer errors. This led to significant job displacement in these sectors. Redundant clerks, often with families to support, found their specialized skills devalued leading to pockets of economic hardship and social unrest. Newspaper articles and pamphlets of the time featured anxious debates about man versus machine in the counting house. However, as old jobs vanished, new ones emerged. Construction, maintenance, and operation of the engines themselves required a new workforce. Skilled mechanics, engineers, furnace stokers for the steam-powered BMOS, and of course the analytical programmers and data input clerks. These new roles often demanded different skills and training, leading to a shift in the labor market. Entirely new industries also began to form around computational services. Companies sprang up offering to perform complex calculations for businesses that could not afford their own engines. This included tasks like actuarial analysis for insurance companies, load calculations for engineering projects, and inventory management for large retailers. The efficiency gains in these sectors were often dramatic, leading to lower costs for some services and enabling businesses to undertake projects previously deemed too complex or time-consuming. The stock exchanges and financial markets were also transformed. Engines could track transactions, calculate indices, and even in rudimentary ways, attempt to model market trends. This increased the speed and volume of trading, but also introduced new kinds of systemic risks, as errors in programming or data input could potentially have rapid and widespread financial consequences. The gap between those who understood and could harness the power of the new technology and those who could not began to widen. Industrialists who invested in computational machinery often gained significant competitive advantages, while smaller businesses struggled to keep up. There was a growing sense that the economy was becoming more complex, more abstract, and driven by forces that were not entirely human. This cog-driven economic shift was hailed by some as a new dawn of prosperity and efficiency. But for many ordinary Victorians, it was a period of uncertainty as a familiar world of commerce was being irrevocably altered by the relentless march of the calculating machines. Number 2. Difference engine detectives and the scientific pursuit of criminals. The fog-laden streets of Victorian cities, notorious as a haven for crime, became a new proving ground for the analytical engines. Scotland Yard and other police forces, grappling with rising urban populations and increasingly sophisticated criminal enterprises, saw potential in these machines to bring a new scientific rigor to detection. While the image of a lone, brilliant detective relying on intuition and observation remained popular in fiction, real-world policing began to incorporate the cold logic of computation. One of the first applications was the systematic organization and cross-referencing of criminal records. Previously, identifying repeat offenders or connecting disparate crimes committed by the same individual relied on the memory of experienced officers or cumbersome manual searches through paper files. Engines allowed for the creation of hoachable database of known criminals, their methods, associates, and areas of operation. A witness description, a peculiar modus operandi, or a recovered piece of evidence could be coded and fed into the engine, which would then sift through thousands of records to identify potential matches or patterns. This led to the early exploration of what might anachronistically be termed predictive policing. By analyzing data on past crimes, locations, times, types of offenses, and even weather conditions, programmers attempted to identify patterns that might suggest where and when future crimes were likely to occur. Patrols could then be allocated more strategically. While rudimentary and prone to biases present in the initial data, it represented a significant shift towards a more data-driven approach to law enforcement. The engines were also used in complex investigations. For example, in cases of financial fraud, they could trace convoluted trails of transactions. In murder investigations, they could cross-reference witness statements, alibis, and timelines to identify inconsistencies or potential leads that human investigators might have missed due to the sheer volume of information. Public was fascinated and slightly unnerved by these difference engine detectives, as some newspapers sensationally dubbed the new computational units within police departments. Popular periodicals ran illustrated articles showing gleaming brass machines aiding determined-looking inspectors. This new reliance on mechanical analysis in matters of justice also sparked debate. Could a machine truly understand human motive? What if the data fed into the engine was flawed or biased? Were innocent individuals at risk of being implicated by an impersonal algorithm? Despite these concerns, the allure of bringing scientific certainty to the messy business of crime solving was powerful. The science of deduction, famously championed by fictional characters like Sherlock Holmes, found a very real, if clunkier, counterpart in the humming, clicking, analytical engines of the Victorian police, forever changing the way society pursued its transgressors. These mechanical sleuths did not replace human detectives, but they became powerful, indispensable tools in their arsenal. Number 1. The dawn of public computation, kiosks, and the communal information age. In this alternate Victorian era, the concept of a personal computer was unimaginable. The calculating engines were vast, expensive, and required specialized knowledge to operate. Yet, the utility of computation was undeniable, and a unique solution emerged to bring its benefits in the limited way to the broader public: the public computation kiosk or the calculation house. These establishments began to appear in city centers, bustling market towns, and even some larger railway stations. Imagine a small, sturdy booth, perhaps made of cast iron and wood, with a polished brass counter. Inside, an operator, often a woman trained in basic data entry and machine operation, would attend to a scaled-down, simpler version of an analytical engine, perhaps driven by clockwork or a small, dedicated steam pipe from a central boiler. Citizens could approach these kiosks for a small fee to have various calculations performed. A small shopkeeper might bring their weekly accounts to be tallied. A builder might need to calculate the volume of materials for a project. A family might want to compute the interest on a small loan or plan a household budget. The operator would take down the query, translate it into a series of card punches or dial settings for the simpler machine, and after a period of whirring and clicking, provide the customer with a printed slip containing the result. These kiosks essentially democratized access to basic computational power, making it a public utility much like the post office or the public water pump. Beyond simple arithmetic, some more advanced kiosks, often found in libraries or commercial districts, offered access to kaiju'd information. These information engines could retrieve specific data from pre-programmed tatons, train timetables, shipping arrivals and departures, summaries of recent parliamentary debates, or even commodity prices from distant markets, relayed by telegraph and updated regularly. This created a very different kind of information age from the one we know. Information was not instantly accessible at one's fingertips. It was a mediated experience obtained through a human operator and a public machine. Calculation houses became social hubs of a sort, places where people queued, exchanged news, and marveled at the quiet efficiency of the public brain. Operators of these kiosks became familiar figures in their communities, trusted intermediaries between the public and the new world of automated information. These kiosks also fostered a degree of public numeracy and an appreciation for the power of data, even among those who would never dream of programming an engine themselves. The sight of a child watching in fascination as the kiosk operator fed cards into a slot and a neatly printed answer emerged became a common one, symbolizing a society slowly but surely integrating mechanical intelligence into the fabric of its daily life, not through individual ownership, but through communal access.